everybody. Today we're going to be making a stitchless watch strap. So this is pretty much, there are a couple stitches here, but you can see we're fully lined. We have a floating keeper, and it's just a really easy intro. So I like watches, I have a bunch of watches, but every 5 or 6 years I'll just remake leather straps. And it usually means that every 4 or 5 years I have to learn how to make leather straps again, because strap making is a very specific niche in leatherwork, and there are ways to do things, there are ways to not do things. Now, of course, you can do things any way you want as long as you hold your watch, but I wanted to really make sure I had everything down, so I'm showing you the correct way to do things. So today we're going to start off easy. We're going to do a stitchless leather strap. So the thing I like about these watch straps is that they are actually very luxurious feeling. Sometimes you'll see watch straps where it'll be just kind of like one thick piece of leather, and then they'll spin it around and tie it off, and you have all open grain here. To me, that just doesn't, I mean, you can wear them in and they feel nice, but I like it when you take the time to add a backing. We're going to use some nice strong glue so it shouldn't come undone. But this is the first thing I like to do. I like to start with an 1.5 inch strip of leather, so that gives us plenty of room to play around with, and it lets us trim everything down so everything is nice and straight and exactly the width we need it. Because with watch straps, you're not really, 1 millimeter makes a big difference, because there are watches with 19 millimeter straps and 20 millimeter straps, and a 19 millimeter strap on a 20 millimeter watch, it has a lot of wiggle room, so you want to make sure that you're getting just the right fit. So now that we have our piece, this is going to be for our long section of the watch strap. And the only thing you want to do is you want to fold this in half and just make sure that you have plenty of leather to make your watch strap. Now, I make mine long because I have very big wrists. You can see on this watch strap I actually added a separate liner, but I want to show you a very simple way to do it. And it's actually stronger if we just glue this in half like this, and then our spring bar can go right in here. So I'm going to take a little bit of a pencil or a pen, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark off where our fold line is going to be, very lightly, and then I'm going to mark off a 1/4 inch on either side of that. And all that's basically going to tell us to do is, if we can, don't glue anything in here, because that's where our spring bar is going to go, and it'll just make our lives easier if we're not having to shove it all in there to break open the glue. And the reason I use an 1.5 inch is because if you want to make a taper, so some watch straps, the lug width will be 22 millimeters, but you'll want to do a 20 millimeter buckle or an 18 millimeter buckle just to give it some taper. By doing this an 1.5 inch wide, you have the opportunity to do whatever you want once this all glues together. So for now, we want to just glue, we want to leave this line kind of glue free, because that's where our spring clip is, or spring thing is going to go to attach to the watch. Obviously, I'm not very good with watch terminology. So I'm just going to leave a little tiny bit unglued there, and we can break it free with a scratch awl as well. That's no problem. And if you want to go over that, we're going to end up gluing this whole thing anyway, so if you want to go over it, just make sure you get plenty for that to stick to. And with that, our other piece should be ready to go. So this is going to be our tail end, and all we're going to do is fold it and stick it. Like that. So believe it or not, we're actually getting close to this piece being done already. All I'm going to do is I'm going to square up my end, and I'm going to get myself a straight edge. Now, to get exactly 22 millimeters, we're going to take a set of dividers. What I like to do is make it to the watch that I'm using. So I'm going to close those dividers till we get exactly the gap of the lug width. there. Then on our straight edge that we cut, we can just use our dividers to make a light line. Once we cut that line, we should have a strap that is the correct size for our watch. So now we can test. Get this spring clip out. So now we can take this and we can test it right in there, and that looks pretty good to me. So honestly, we're almost done with this one. I'm going to go in on the back. Actually, I don't have any specific measurements, so I'm going to go here and here, and we're going to nip off about that much. Now you could do whatever you want with your tails. You can use a rounded strap end punch, you can use a pointed strap end punch. What I like to do is I like to use my grid on my board, and all I'll do is I'll take my flat knife and I'll go up to 1 inch and I'll go in about 1/8 of an inch, and I'll just take that little corner off, and I'll just do the same thing over here. And so now we have a nice little pointy thing. You can take off that. We're going to sand this down, take off the sharp edge there. Yeah, and then we need to punch holes. So these holes that I use are about 8 millimeters apart. But to be honest with you, I tend to get lazy, and I'll just match up these ends, and I'll just make my marks this way using an existing. You can make a template too. I just don't have a template. So there. So that's where we need our holes. Then the scary part is punching the holes to make sure they're straight, which I know I don't do the correct way. But I'm just using a rotary punch and making sure everything is centered the best as it can be.
Does it matter what size hole you use?
Yeah, you're gonna want to watch your hole. You're gonna want to match your hole up to, like you can see that's a little crooked, but you guys get the point. You're gonna want to match your hole up to the tongue on the buckle of the watch strap that you're using. So we have this one that has a little tiny tongue. So I probably could have gone smaller than this, but it would have looked kind of weird on camera. But as you can see, if we line this up, we're pretty on spot. It goes this way a little bit, but I'm just making it for myself and showing you guys how to do it. So I'm not that worried about it. And plus, honestly, like with leather watch bands, I'm not saying if you're going to sell something, make sure it's perfect. But if you're making stuff for yourself, this is going to get so deformed taking it on and off or anything. Don't be worried if you are off a little bit with your hole punching if you're doing it freehand. They do make dies where it'll punch all the dies, all the holes all at once. They make hole punches that are wider for wider tongues. But if you're just using it for yourself, you want to have some fun, this is a great way to make a super high quality watch strap on the cheap and on the quick. And it's kind of a style. You could also, if you wanted to do just totally unstitched, you could do that as well. So I'm going to bevel both my sides here. And a lot of people who are much more serious about watch strap making, which is, I have the utmost respect for people that just make watch straps because it is a very, very, very detailed niche. And they'll glue things in, there's jigs where you can glue them kind of curved so that when they come off the jig, they're basically, they form fit your wrist right away. This will do that. You can see how, this one has the curve because I've been wearing it for a while, but it just takes a while to break in. So that's all up to you. Again, this is a very, very, very beginner course in a very, very simple style of watch strap. So what I'm doing is I'm just sanding with 320 grit. And I want to get this burnished before I do the stitching because I want my stitching to go over my finished burnished edged. So as you can see, we have a very formidable looking watch strap in very few steps. Now the key is use like a Barge or a Masters or something that's meant to glue soles onto shoes, because if you use junk glue, this stuff's going to just come peeled apart. The last step before we're very much completely done with this is I like to take my awl and very carefully put it through where my spring bars are going to go, just to make sure that I have plenty of room. And that's why we leave that little bit of unglued spot. And lastly, I'm going to put a little bit of a stitch just right here. Right there and right there. And what that's going to do is prevent my... looking for another awl here. There you go. It's going to prevent... this is the only place that there's really going to be a lot of tension. So these holes are going to hold this closed. We're just going to wrap a little bit of thread around the outside, and they're going to hold this closed so that the rest of this isn't getting pressured to pull up. I like to do 3 usually. I think 2 looks nicer, but 3 gives me peace of mind. You just want to make sure you're stacking them. You don't want them crossing over, so it looks nice and neat and tidy. Glue's drying. I have a 4 3/4 inch piece of leather here. Now, again, this, like I said, this is going to be different depending on the size of the watch strap you're trying to make. I'm going to make one line at 1 1/4 inches, and then I'm just going to kind of split the middle by eye. And this is basically going to be where we're skiving and where we are ideally folding. Now, 1 1/4 inch skive with a flat knife is no joke. I've been working on it for months. So this is about the best I can do. We've already done a couple tries that we had to not include. But the goal is you just want to go slow and you want to go very shallow on your first pass, so you can kind of see what you have to work with. And then you can go through, I go through at least, and I do multiple little passes. Doesn't help that this is veg tin either. Veg tin's really hard to skive because it's so dry. That'll get us close. And then I'm going to flip this over and trim off these little crusties here. And now, if we go back and we remake our center line, our goal is going to be to fold this over and glue that like that. Now, remember, we have the skive part, we have our lines, so the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to fold these over to try to match our lines as best we can. You can wet this, actually. I should probably case this a little bit. When you're using veg tan, if you try to bend it too severely, it can crack, just because it doesn't have any real oils or anything in it. So if we do a quick casing, we don't have to risk that, because we are going to hammer it down. Now notice I'm not hitting the actual bend itself, because we are going to be sticking a spring bar through that. So we want to be able to get our awl all the way through, which this isn't super long, but it goes all the way through. And you can also glue you can use a needle to glue in there if you want. Here, we'll do that on the next one. So for this one, let's grab a needle here. And what we can do is we can put the needle right there where there's no glue. And we can fold this over like this. Actually, I forgot to case it again. So we can put our needle in, and we can fold this over, get to where we want to be, and our needle is there holding the place for our spring bar. And then we pull the needle out. So now we have the start of our buckle end. The next step we need to do, what I like to do at least, is I take this piece up to my grid here, and I'm going to just scribe a little line, and this line is going to be where my liner goes. And I'm just doing that to make sure, A, that it's even, right? It's parallel, or perpendicular to the edge of the wallet. But I'm also doing it to make sure that when we do our single stitch, the one stitch that we have holding a lot of this stuff together besides the glue, which is plenty enough, we're going to be able to get some of our tail in that stitch. So before we do any gluing, I'm just going to rough up this stuff under the stitch. And we're going to get that, let that casing dry while we cut out our liner piece. There we go. And just when you thought it was time to take a little break, let the glue dry, we need a keeper. Now I'm going to do a simple floating keeper. So this is a sewn-in keeper. You can see how it's sewn into the bottom liner. It's not going anywhere. Traditionally, you would also add a floating keeper. So you have two keepers. In theory, if you're a big wrist like I am and you only need the one, you can pull this off and take the second off. The other option that I like to do sometimes, I do a little bit of a wider single keeper because I think it looks more modern, and it just floats on the back. All I'm going to do is take a piece of leather that's a little bit thicker, so I think that was about 5-6 ounces. This is about 7 ounces. I'm going to cut myself a 1/2 inch strip, and I'm going to burnish it. And then we're not going to be able to do anything until we have those pieces put together because we need to custom size this for the thickness of our actual watch strap. So now what we want to do is we're going to take our little piece that we skived down, and this is going to be kind of our liner piece. We just want to make sure that we line it up perfectly so we're not seeing any of this glue or this line on either end. And I did go a little bit over. I usually make it like 1/8 of an inch bigger so that we can almost overlap it a little bit so we can guarantee that we're not going to see those little pieces. And remember, we're going to trim this down too, so it's okay if the sides don't fit that well. And the big thing when you're doing a fully glued piece, I gotta come up here, is that you want to really hammer this down. If you ever watch shoemakers on YouTube or anywhere, you really want to set the glue. And remember, if you're using, you want to use a good glue, Barge Cement Masters, whatever, because that glue is meant to hold soles on the shoes all on its own. So in theory, if we get this nice and set, we shouldn't have any problems with delamination. So I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the first piece, with the tail here. I'm going to line up this seam so that I know that when I cut up this seam, it's going to be at a right angle to the top and the bottom. And as usual, I'm just using the grid on my cutting board. And I'm going to do light passes. I'm not going to try to cut through this all in one go. That's how you kind of get in trouble going all askew. I still have my calipers set for my 22 millimeters, but I'm just going to check. There we go. And then we're going to make our line here. And that's just a easy, no-nonsense way to make sure that you're getting the perfect cut for the width that you need, given that these are very specific by the millimeter to what's going to fit what watch. So if you need to do 18, 19, 22, 24, you can do all that with this watch. With this strap design, you just have to make sure that you're tailoring it to the strap that you need. I'll slide this up on my cutting board so that I have my watch strap lining up with a vertical line, and this horizontal line can show me exactly where I can punch my holes so that they'll be even on both sides. So I'll go there, and I'll go there, and I'm just marking them quickly, and then I'll go back and punch them all the way through. And I'm going to go there, and there. And now, yep, we can just punch right through. And you got to be careful what kind of scratch. If you're using a very delicate scratch awl that's only meant for scratching, like this is bending a little bit because it's a pretty lightweight blade that's only meant for scratching. So just be careful when you're punching through holes like this on thick leather because you don't want to bend your blade. So as you can see, we're coming extremely close in a very small amount of time to having this beautiful, fully lined watch strap ready to go. Of course, it's natural veg that's been beaten on with a hammer, so you need to oil it and it'll even out color. But I do have a little tip. You can see there's a little bit of a mark here from where I hammered, and that's mostly because my hammer isn't the cleanest thing in the world. You can take a white eraser and just go in and erase it. You don't have to scrape, you don't have to sand, you don't have to do anything. And that will take most of your marks off and leave you nice and clean. So a lot of people say, hey, how do you keep your work so clean? And the truth is, I don't. I just go in with an eraser afterwards and erase most of my marks. Of course, you can't do that if you get dye or anything on it, but an eraser goes a very long way if you're working a natural, undyed veg tan. So the last thing we need to do is get our keeper ready. Now we need both of our pieces stacked to get our keeper length. What I like to do is, I like to take my skive knife, if I can, oh god, it's floating around, it's right here. I like to take my skive knife and I skive a 1/2 inch off the back side of my keeper. Like this. Then, I'm going to take my keeper and I'm going to wrap it tightly around my 2 watch strap pieces. And I want my keeper to end about 1/8 to 1/4 inch from the edge, and I want it to be very tightly wrapped. Then I'm going to fold this over, and I'm going to use my scratch awl to make 2 marks. The first mark is going to be where I want my keeper to end. The second mark is where I want my skive to begin. Because we skive the underside of this part of the keeper, we're actually going to skive the overside of this part of the keeper. So, on my first mark, and I'm going to use my grid to make sure everything's parallel or perpendicular, I'm going to cut off where I marked to cut off. Then, should be about a 1/2 inch, which it is. I'm going to skive from the top down, like so. And with this, you really want to get that paper thin. That's totally fine. So then, what we're going to do is, this mark, because we skived on the top, denotes where we're going to glue this to. See? And then when we're done, we're going to have a nice even thickness throughout the whole thing, and we're going to stitch this on top of the glue to make sure that it's nice and sturdy. This is the end that I'm going to have my buckle on, so I'm just going to take a punch that fits the tongue. So this is the tongue of the buckle. You want to make sure that whatever slot you're cutting will fit that tongue, and these vary from brand to brand. So I like to do it a little bit bigger than I need it, just to give a little wiggle room, and I'm going to go in a fair amount, center it as best I can, and you'll see that I didn't cut through, and that is because we need a straight cut. So I'm just going to go in and very carefully cut this straight, and there we go. And you can sand that down if you want. I kind of like this kind of strap because you can show some of the handmade inconsistencies. That's kind of part of this design. Now most of you probably know, if you're watching, how to install a spring buckle, but we're going to slide our tongue in, and then those holes that we made, that's where our spring bar goes. So we're going to wiggle that through, making sure that it catches the tongue, and push that through on the other side. Then this is a matte buckle. It's just what I grabbed out of the parts bin. We have shiny ones too, but that's what this one's getting. Do I have a spring bar tool over here? See if I can do it with my nail. There we go. You'll hear a click. There we go. So our buckle is installed. So it's keeper time. Now, what we're going to do is, we have where we skived from the outside. I'm going to make sure I use that as my line so that I'm not seeing any flesh. Oh, I see a little bit of flesh. It might be cut crooked too. Alright, we're going to go a little over then. There we go. So, we have no flesh there. Nice and seamless. You can see it kind of, because we skived, it keeps the same consistency all around. I'm going to throw a couple stitches into this. So the way I do this is I take a thicker piece of leather and I just slide it right in there. And you got to be a little careful because you don't want to punch through the whole thing. But I'm going to place that, my stitching prongs, right about there, which is in between the two. And then just a couple taps until I get into this leather, which is our... There we go. And you can see we did not go through the other side. Everything. First thing we're going to do is we're going to put our keeper right through. Then we're going to put our spring bar, which is what holds the strap to the watch, right through our little spring bar hole. Now the buckle part goes on the top of the watch. So, I'm not very graceful with this part, so I'll do my best. This is a spring bar tool. It's just got a little bit of a... It's got two little prongs, and we're going to lower this down. There we go. Now all that's left is for this part. Spring bar number 2. And there we go. There is our fully lined, unstitched, well, minus our little detail stitching, natural veg tan watch strap. And here we go, guys. So here's pretty much one of the most simple versions of a watch strap that you can make that is fully lined and nice and luxurious feeling while not being a whole ton of work. Remember, you can also go crazier with it and do Italian leathers with edge painting, and you know, if you want to put your name on the back, you could do any of that stuff. But to get you going, every few years I put new watch straps in all my watches, and every few years I have to get back into it because it's such a niche thing that you got to learn all the tips and tricks. Now there are plenty of different ways to do it where you're doing some filler material to add depth, and you're doing stitching the whole thing. We'll get to that down the road, but I just wanted to start off because there have been a lot of interest in watches in the comments lately. I just wanted to start off with a simple watch project that'll get you going. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I certainly did. I love making watch straps. And thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.
Sandwich.
One of them Boston cream things. And
Bomb.
yeah, and if they